extra now of historical record, how that got briefed to John Podesta. Podesta briefed it to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton goes on various shows like Jimmy Kimmel and tells the people, you know, there's a new terminology now, it's UAP. Well, when we think about the Pentagon's secret UFO program, what we're seeing really, I think, is an extension of that policy. It's not just UFO turning now into UAP, but it's reframing the thing as an advanced aerospace threat identification program. So it's a way, in one sense, of doing UFOs without having a formal UFO project. And that, of course, is vitally important. One of the big parts of this story is the fact that, in a sense, it's the biggest part of this story. For years, the US government said, we are no longer interested in this subject. We don't investigate. There isn't a program. And yet there was. I mean, that is a stratospherically impactful revelation. And it is one of those rare game-changing moments. But I think the terminology is important. Defining it as a threat is what gets even skeptical Pentagon managers interested. And it's what gets you the funding to run something like this.
Well, there's been the criticism that $22 million came through the Nevada senator, and that most of that money went to Robert Bigelow Aerospace. Luis Elizondo was running the Office of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, as the New York Times pointed out, on the 5th floor C ring in the Pentagon. But most of the money was going to Robert Bigelow Aerospace, and also in the New York Times and the Washington Post. It pointed out that it was the Bigelow Aerospace had a large warehouse in which, and the word was used, extraterrestrial artifacts are supposed to have been placed, gathered from who knows what sites. But it seems as if there were like clues all through the New York Times and the Washington Post that this story was much bigger than the infrared gun camera, including what is in the warehouse. And yet, we're talking at the middle of February 2018. This was December 16th and 18th, 2017. There really has not been any research follow-up, even by the mainstream organizations that you would think that they would be going to Defense Department spokesmen, that they would be filing FOIAs, that they would be contacting Bigelow Aerospace for more information.
Well, all of those things are happening. I mean, first of all, but let me backtrack, because I think this is important. One of the main reasons, of course, why a program like this will be put into the private sector, well, there are kind of three reasons, and one of them is an obvious one, and two are maybe unintended consequences, or maybe intended. That's the debate. The first point is that very often, of course, there is no in-house expertise or resources to undertake a particular task. I mean, you know, to be flippant about it, the Pentagon staffers don't build aircraft. So you have to put something out into the private sector and get someone like Boeing or Northrop to build something for you. Same with something like this. You know, you simply don't have people in the DoD headquarters with the knowledge and experience to do this sort of work. So you put it out to open contract, and that's certainly my understanding of what happened. This was an open contract. Hal Puthoff, I believe, helped write the bid that won Bigelow Aerospace that particular contract. The Times, as part of the meticulous fact-checking process, saw certainly some of that contractual documentation. Now, the other consequences of moving a program like that into the private sector, and I've had some experience of this in the Ministry of Defence in the UK, is that it makes congressional scrutiny more difficult, and critically, of course, it takes a lot of the material, not all of it, but a lot of it, outside of the scope of the Freedom of Information Act. And of course, Bigelow Aerospace, people might say, well, you know, why isn't Robert Bigelow going to release any of this? Well, it's his commercial proprietary information. And a lot of this will depend on just how the Pentagon people and Bigelow's people framed the contract. Now, I've not seen that contract, so I don't know. But this is a huge story, as you say. There's a multifaceted story. In one way, I think I've surprised people when I say to them, in one sense, the videos are the least exciting part of this story. I mean, look, hell, we've had videos and gun camera footage. We've known for decades that pilots, military pilots, see and chase UFOs, that they're tracked on radar. We have cases back to the 40s and 50s of that kind of thing. I mean, certainly in the 50s in the UK, including gun camera footage, by the way.
And wouldn't you think that whether it was 60 Minutes or the New York Times' follow-up, that they would go to Bigelow Aerospace and say, it's been on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post about you having a warehouse with extraterrestrial artifacts. What about showing it to the public?
Well, two things. Firstly, when you show it to the public, you also show it to the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans. So if you've got something sensitive, particularly if you're a business person, if you think you're going to make some money off of it, releasing it to the world just because people are interested is not in your DNA. And Robert Bigelow is clearly playing his cards close to his chest, maybe because he's hoping for further government contracts, but more to the point, I suspect, because he is hoping to derive some commercial advantage out of this. I mean, look, the first corporation that gets a handle on this and figures out, as to the Stars Academy are trying to do, how to build some earth-shattering technology. I mean, that corporation is going to be leader of the pack, and Robert Bigelow does not want to show that because somebody else will come in, and all sorts of tech billionaires might come in and do something with this. But to go back to your other point, there are a whole bunch. I mean, I think when I last heard about this from a British journalist, I think it was around 1,500 FOI requests in with DIA at the moment, absolutely inundating them. They've sent out a few holding replies, but
that's good to hear.
They are absolutely sinking in a sea of these requests, and perhaps we won't know more until we get substantive replies. And I think, unfortunately, the system has been bogged down with people sending in, please send me everything you've got on ATIP, as opposed to more narrowly focused, targeted requests.
But there's a problem with this, and there's a lot of people that have raised this question. When you use taxpayer dollars, which is exactly what this project was, $22 million, and then you want to hide it from the public, how does government, and you worked in government, justify that? It's one thing to have a private contract, and he's using his own money for R&D and development. That is his predatory right. But to sit there and be funded by the American taxpayer for $22 million and to hide all this just isn't ethical or right. And the American people deserve to know more than they're being told right now. Would you not agree?
I take the point. However, I would say, well, that goes on all the time. I mean, everything is funded with taxpayers' dollars, whether it's in the military or whether it's roads and bridges and whatever. I mean, we pay for everything, and my goodness, don't we know? I guess the point is that just because you fund something through your taxes doesn't necessarily, under the system in which we live, whether you agree with it or not, give us the right to have everything brought out of those dark hangars and made public.
It's not bringing stuff out of the dark hangars when it comes to this. They're literally saying, here we're going to tease you with a little bit of evidence, and now you're going to wait for more. But by the way, the government's funding $22 million to do this. Oh, but by the way, we hold technology in the hand. But we're not going to show it to you. And we're not going to show you the intelligence reports behind this, which is disingenuous because the government, when you said earlier, has to fund this out to the private enterprise, they're the ones that make the specs. They're the ones that does the research and the technology and tells private enterprise what they want. So this is disingenuous across the board. If they weren't going to tell us anything in the first place other than to tease us, why tell us anything? This doesn't help in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm not sure they wanted to tell. I think they were kind of forced into it when Luis Elizondo went public through the To the Stars Academy. So I'm not sure, though I've heard some people speculate otherwise, that this is actually the way that the Pentagon wanted to do things. I mean, look, you know, my experience of government, and certainly in the Ministry of Defense, is your desired position is to say as little as possible. I mean, nothing if you can get away with it. Let me go back to the money, actually. That's quite an important point. People have said $22 million, and yeah, it's a lot to you or I. Of course, in a $600 billion defense budget, it's not going to buy much. And just to contextualize it, I mean, a new F-35 stealth fighter costs about $100 million. So $22 million is not going to get you much. However, I've also done in my 21-year MOD career a financial policy job, and I know that it depends how you spin the figures with this. 22 million, I suspect, are additional cash costs, not the resource costs involved. And just to kind of explain how that works, most of the things you need to run a UFO program are already there, and they're already funded. So, for example, your sophisticated air defense network, your radar systems, your imagery analysis, resources and capabilities, all those exist, they're funded. And that's why, of course, Lou Elizondo has said quite clearly that even though the funding plug was pulled in 2012, the program continued, certainly to the point that he left in I think October 2017. And the reason ACTIP continued, and probably continues now, is that it doesn't need those additional cash costs.
But listen, that program, they're trying to spin it as non-classified, right? But in fact, there had to be some non-disclosures involved with this just because they won't release certain information now. So how can you justify the fact that he came out? He had to have been involved in a secret program. He had to have been involved with non-disclosures. And why would he come out and jeopardize everything unless the DOD supported it in the first place?
Well, the way I understand it is that it was a resignation on principle. I think I've heard him say, something along the lines of to do the job, he had to leave the job. I think, we can have a debate about whether he is legitimately described as a whistleblower. I think he probably is, but it's very clear, listening to him, that he knows, A, obviously, that there is a line, B, he knows exactly where that line is, and C, he's being darned careful not to cross it.
And Nick, my understanding was that he officially retired on October 10th, so he could do the To the Stars live stream on October 11th and be able to say, I am no longer speaking officially for the Department of Defense or Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Project. And when the October 11th live stream occurred, everyone I know was left with the same feeling of confusion. They say that they want to raise money to the stars to build a spacecraft to go to the stars. And yet you, I, and everybody who has had any true connection with people behind the scenes who actually have knowledge, the United States and probably the UK and the allies of World War II, we already have very advanced craft through collaboration of working with what are called ally ETs. We already have the craft. Remote viewers say we've already been to Mars and to the moon with that craft. So doesn't that make the To the Stars presentation sort of like theater?
Well, I don't hold any brief for the To the Stars Academy, but what I will say is this: my understanding is that so far they've raised about $2.5 million.
Which that isn't going to buy any kind of a spacecraft.
It might buy you an ejector seat on one. Yeah, no, not much more. I think there are two things. I suspect that part of it is just principle, that this is, I think, a public corporation. I forget the technical term for the category of corporation it is, but I suppose an opportunity for anyone and everyone to own a piece of this, or John, I should say, own a piece of what you would probably say rightly that we already own, or should own.
And it's Corso's story.
Well,
this is the Philip J. Corso story from the day after Roswell.
Yeah.
That he worked with General Trudeau in the Pentagon, and his job was to hand deliver extraterrestrial technology piece by piece to corporations like Lockheed and Boeing and Arco and Corning Glass. And the idea was get them back engineered, get them patented, get them into commercial application, and keep them out of the hands of our perceived human enemies. So it is as if nothing has changed, and yet this is being defined as if everything started 2007 to 12, when it didn't start 2007 to 12, and we already have advanced spacecraft. So what do you think is really happening behind the scenes now?
Well, I suspect a couple of things. Firstly, I suspect that despite the $2.5 million raised by the To the Stars Academy, the real aim, and frankly the only way that any sophisticated research and development program will ever get off the ground, if you'll excuse the pun, is to bring in somebody, to use this as a kind of stalking horse, to bring in someone like Elon Musk or Yuri Milner, because you're going to need billions, not millions, to build the sorts of things that I think they're talking about.
But what do you think, seriously, now, like, strip away the artifice, strip away the theater, why would there even be a presentation to the American public as if we were starting from 2007 to 2012? At last, the Pentagon was paying attention to UFOs, and now there is To the Stars Academy, and they're going to put you into putting coins together to build a spacecraft, when that is theater, because we already have very advanced craft. It's the secret space program. So it's like playing and toying when it should be a straightforward, huge, worldwide headline news break. We're not alone in this universe and never have been. Why the theatrical play?
I don't know the answer to that question, but what I can speculate on, and what I see happening, and it's something I've seen before over the years, and I think it's part of an ongoing, I hate to use the word game, but I don't mean that in a trivial way. I see factions within the government and within the military, the intelligence community, wherever. And on this particular issue, I see a skeptic faction, a believer faction. I see factions that maybe want to get material out there, and factions that want to keep a lid on this. And how I would characterize some of this, I don't think it's theater, but I think it's what I might call the believer faction making their move. And maybe they had to make that move outside of government, okay. So leave and then do it privately.
Okay, but Nick, let's take away whether we have a secret space program or not for just a second from the government standpoint. When you develop technology like the F-35, you give it out to the defense contractors, they develop the technology, they bid on it, they look at which prototype they want to use, right? So To the Stars is claiming they want to build a ship to go interstellar to the stars. Why, if they're trying to build this, wouldn't they be developing this technology for a government contract? Because the government would want us, forget about the alien side of it now, just the fact of being able to go out into space different than rockets. So why isn't this being kept quiet? Why isn't this technology being bidded out? All these companies are developing, which Boeing supposedly is also working on your technology, okay? And then once it's developed and tested, then it goes forward. Why the ruse with we need to raise private donations to put together a project to go to the stars? Like you said, $2.5 million isn't even going to put the seat in the project, let alone draw it, develop it, and test it. I mean, there's something missing here that's not right. And forget about whether or not we have a secret space program. And I'm not saying we do or don't. It's just the way you've been in government. You talked about finances earlier. This isn't even following the line of how they would develop the technology to go out into space.
No, I mean, I think that what Tom DeLonge is doing is motivated by what I would call a sort of principled activism, you know. But yeah, as I said, 2.5 million isn't going to get you anything. Of course, no. The real story has to be deeper. Maybe it's going on already and we don't know about it, or maybe it's aspirational in that he's trying to attract somebody like Musk or Milner.
But why would these, like Hal Puthoff, the physicist that ran Stargate, and he's a physicist and working on this technology, why would they even come forward with it? Everything else is secret. All our space, technology, our weapons, like you said, they want to keep it quiet. Why bring it out? Why would a guy that works for the government in the black programs even want to make it public? Why not just develop it, get the bids, get the funding? Why isn't Bigelow doing it quietly and doing it? There's something missing here that goes deeper, Nick, and I think it's hard to explain. Government doesn't operate the way this is going down.
No. One possible explanation, I mean, I'm speculating here, of course. One possible explanation is that all these people who've resigned haven't really resigned, and that this is something else is going on. I mean, you know, without wanting to get too far into this, we've all heard stories, I'm sure, about special forces soldiers resigning their commission, joining private defense contractors, going to do something, and then mysteriously re-enlisting. Well, you know, just as a way of doing a job off the books with deniability. So, you know, of course, a question that many people in the UFO community are asking, and rightly so, is have these people really resigned? And when they're speaking out now, are they really speaking as private citizens, or do they still hold security clearances? Are they still really secretly working for the government? I don't know the answers to those questions, but those are, of course, the sorts of questions we should all be asking.
Yet in the New York Times, they put a sentence in there that says that that the Office Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was funded from 2007 to 2012, 5 years. And then there was a sentence that said, but background sources say it is still continuing. There was no explanation. It was just those words were in the New York Times, still continuing. How do you have your cake and eat it too?
Well, that is the point about using concurrent resources. I mean, that's the point, that you may not have additional cash costs, but you can continue to investigate UFO sightings. I mean, look, the point is, I suppose, that even if the funding stopped in 2012, clearly, as we all know, UFO sightings haven't stopped. We haven't stopped having these encounters between military jets and UFOs as tracked on radar. And thus, the US government, like all governments all around the world, is going to want to follow up on anything uncorrelated in its airspace. So sure, you know, you just use those already pre-funded defense assets.
Nick,
so the project clearly does continue.
Okay, you work for the MOD. Okay, if you held alien technology like they claim they did, would the MOD release it to the private sector? And if they did, would they admit to it? And would they identify where it's being stored? That's just another example of